Welcome to CGI Voices, where CGI's experts share insights on the latest in federal government management, policy, and technology. I'm your host, Pete Tseronis. Hey, this is Pete Tseronis, and I'm here today with Josh Sonnier, who leads CGI's analytics and intelligence practice within the Emerging Technologies Group. It's great to see you, Josh.
Glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we got together about a year ago with one of your colleagues, Victor Folk, and it was before the executive order on AI came out. And it was really just beginning the process, this journey the federal government's been undergoing in terms of how is it going to have an impact. So today we wanted to dive a little bit into, a year since then, the executive order has come out, as well as a lot of other materials, and just kind of get your perspective. But before we jump into that, I always like to talk about your journey and why this topic is of interest to you and your passion for CGI and its following of not only AI, but the impact it will have in the public sector.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a mathematician and physicist by training, and came into software development a long time ago because, like a lot of developers, I was lazy about doing things multiple times. If I could invest the time to do it once and have the process take over. And so a lot of the research that we were doing at the time was in machine learning and what would later become very popularly referred to as data science. It was numerical analysis and quantitative analysis and things like that. And so did a lot of work in the energy sector as an R&D physicist, doing software development that whole time, and then moved into addressing tech debt as a technical director at an incubator and things like that. And stayed very, very interested in natural language processing and AI and machine learning, whether I was working on it for my employment or not, writing things like poetry, language engines, and things in the background. So I'm personally and professionally very, very invested in the tools that have come out or gotten more popularized in the last couple of years, the generative AI tools, the things that are making the popularity of the tool sets explode.
Yeah, I think the first of all, impressive background, and I love the reference to energy. I used to work at the Department of Energy, but a lot of R&D really is driving a lot of the AI and its advancement. And you mentioned tools, and if I may, there's so many tools out there. There's always a new tool popping up that can do this, that, or the other. But the science behind AI, and maybe jumping right into the executive order, is there's three tenets, right? AI governance, advancing the responsible AI and its innovation is tenet one, managing risks from the use of AI, as well as that governance role. And you read this executive order that came out in October of 2023. It says a lot. There's a lot being put on agencies, from personnel to workforce to just the R&D component, working with academic institutions. And you seem to be blazing those trails. The executive order itself, what struck you as this is a good thing, not just for government, but for the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever we began to dig in and try to pull the technical levers on these generative AI frameworks or a lot of the emerging technologies that we do on my team at CGI, we noticed in the agencies that there was basically a 50-50 split for risk. Agencies were wanting to get ahead of the curve and begin to adopt quickly and test internally, or they were completely risk averse, banning tools like this in their offices. And so that was going to be problematic for adoption if that's how the split stayed. And so whenever the executive order came out, it outlined terms that agencies had to adhere to, assign someone to own this, the CAIO, make sure that you are adopting these things in a safe, risk-averse, but sort of forward-looking way, and be sure that you're working with folks who can help you innovate safely. It doesn't do anybody any good if an agency adopts a technology too quickly and there's a large data breach, or a citizen acts on information it was given by an AI tool that turns out to be wrong. And so balancing unrealistic expectations on one side in the positive sense and unrealistic fears on the other side in the negative sense are the things that the executive order, I think, helped to sort of formalize, because every agency was going to have to figure out how to do that. And so getting that guidance relatively early on, I think, helped a lot. The same way, and you were involved with the Cloud First. So the same way that Cloud First said, as agencies, wrap your heads around the cloud, figure out what it's doing, pick some use cases, and adopt safely. And then, I think 9 years later, Cloud Smart. Okay, we have lessons learned. We're going to use those to begin to dig in further on the cloud side for government agencies. The issue that we have that I'm glad the directive came out, and the other similar directives like the GIO and things like that, saying the technologies that we're dealing with, like we're not dealing with our with other agencies or dealing with our competitors so much as we're fighting to not become victims of the underlying technology. It's moving so quickly. That's what we're racing. And so when a directive comes out and they say use the safest model, well, a week later, a month later, certainly a year later, that model's not going to necessarily be the safest model.
So let's riff off that. So number one, it's been about a little over 270 days. And again, looking, just because I'm a chronology here of October, the executive order comes out. In March, Memorandum 24-10 for our listening audience. It's not a bad read. It's what the Office of Management and Budget pushed out and said, these are the terms or these are the steps agencies need to start taking to meet the spirit of that executive order. And then NIST, in April came out with things that you mentioned around standards and frameworks for risk profiling and that balance of manage the risk versus the reward. You could be a late adopter, but there's also early adoption. And I want to just go back to your reference to the tools. There are just so many out there. Maybe speak a little bit to now that we've got the directive, we've got the path, now the decisions, it's the people, the workforce. What tools do we look at? Josh, what is CGI doing to help that journey in the case of the federal government, at least, to kind of think about what tool or process or people they need?
Yeah, excellent question. My team in particular is tasked with pulling all available levers on the technical side. What is it that we can do with these tools? That's not the only thing that we concern ourselves with. We have to look at what we can do, what we're required to do for compliance, and then what we should be doing for safe adoption. And so we have technical adoption, sort of functional adoption, responsible use of AI, those things. But those are the three things that we use to vet these frameworks. And so my team is tasked with taking frameworks apart, putting them back together, and seeing where the shortest path is to safely add value for an agency. If I want to connect a citizen to a particular agency's mission, what is the safest and shortest path for that? What we want to avoid doing, and what we do at CGI, is we adopt these things internally first. And we've had an internal generative AI assistant framework that's been working since early 2023, but it wasn't adopted at CGI Federal until all of the security and compliance could be accounted for. So my team had access to it, but earlier this year, it's deployed now at CGI Federal enterprise.
Tried and true. Works
yeah,
for the
we do. We
organization.
use it ourselves. We use all our own data in it, and I use it every day. And so one of the things that allows us to do is expand outside my team, where we focus on how the tooling works, to other teams where they're going to be using the tooling. So technical adoption is what everybody thought about at first. GPT came out. Everybody wanted to know if it was safe to use and things like that. GPT is just one tool set. What's in the evolution of these tool sets, what's going to become much more important than a particular framework is whether it's citizens or technical and functional staff on a given team, learning to think about problems and framing problems in a way that these tools are very good at solving. If I ask one of these tools to build me a table, it will say, rightfully so, I can't do that. If you say, oh no, I'm going to actually build the table, I just don't know how to do it. Can you tell me step by step how I could build a table in theory? It'll say, oh yeah, of course I can tell you those things. And so these are very powerful tools, because as long as you can frame a problem in language, these tools can respond in language. One of the problems that comes up in terms of risk mitigation is, how do we safely do that? I can ask a question in language, and the models can respond in language, but how do I know that what it's saying is true? And that certainly for information that citizens are going to be interacting with is critical.
And that gets to the trustworthiness that we all, I use the tools. I'm an early adopter. You mentioned the cloud. The cloud was, well, what is the cloud in 2009? And years later, it's now about being cloud first thinker, but smart about using the cloud. AI is here. And, just the other day I was having a conversation with someone about AI and medicine, and the response was, again, AI is going to cure cancer one day. I mean, it probably could today. We just have to figure out how to train.
Right.
So this training component, you mentioned the tools are out there. You mentioned your use case. Again, let's go back to agencies. Once you start using some of these, at least from a generative AI standpoint, they don't seem that hard. You plug in a question. It gives you some information. You could say, I don't know if it's 100% true, but boy, was it quick. Are you finding that adoption of and more a positive experience with some of your customers? Or is there still that, I don't want to trust what I'm being served up because I don't know if it necessarily has provenance?
Yeah. One of the things that we have to do, just as anybody developing using these tools, you have to provide a way that the users can be confident in not only the answer that they're getting, but where it went to get the answer, how did it generate it, because the models aren't the only things that are working. We have background agents that are accessing the internet or hitting safe environments to execute code in the background and things like that. And so all those details might not be interesting to someone, or it may be critical. But if I'm asking a question, I need to be able to tell, and our tools internally do this transparently. They disclose the process. Where did I go? What search did I use? What engine did I use? Did I leave our network or not?
It's like an auditing. It's an auditing function.
And it's all in real time. And so you have, and other people do other things, but these models are sufficiently complex that explaining and explainability, interpretability, those things are talked about a lot. Explaining how they're getting the answers they're getting is not trivial. And so you have to kind of chip away at it and provide ways to explain those and expose the process. And we have a way that we do it. It's just, we have very simple diagrams that illustrate where these things are going, and you can dig into the diagrams and find out what model was used, what region in the U.S. it was used in, things like that. And the feedback that we get internally and externally is that providing that transparency allows people to relax. I tell users all the time, you can't hurt the tool's feelings, and if you ever feel like you've backed it into a corner, just refresh it. Everything you talked about before is gone. And so you can just begin asking questions again. The stakes are very low.
Yeah, well, it's amazing when I think of just college. Dropped my son off this weekend, and it's just the way school and academic environments where you come from, research, right? Looking for information. And not to say you're not trusting, but the tool is powerful. And I think what you're putting in here at CGI are potentially some of these best practices of how to trust the data that eventually will be information that you can leverage for data-driven decision-making.
Yeah, absolutely. The same way that in the days of BI, right, you were looking for actionable insight from data. And what we're trying to do, my team and all of the ancillary teams are trying to do, is use these AI tools not as they are flashy. They're very, they can be kind of gimmicky. Depending on the use case. But what we're trying to do is sort of in the background, in a very easy to use way, bring users as close as possible to either the background data or the systems they're trying to understand. We're trying to soften that interface between the user and whatever systems they're interrogating.
So as we pivot into use cases, I just want to, for the audience again, there are stakeholders and there are folks behind the scenes that are helping generate these models. Of course, the end user using the tool, you type in, I need a table to, we have to remember there's a lot of data science and engineering and software development that goes on behind. And of course, hearing your background, it seems like you've been in a number of these different domains. So great stuff. Good get for CGI for sure. Let's go to use cases. I mean, we've mentioned a few here. For the folks listening, AI.gov is a wonderful resource. The government has really pushed hard and toward providing information and being transparent with the public. As I mentioned, I think it was, July. This past July, the 270-day actions, I think I counted about 84 activities have been met and completed, which is exciting. And the 2024 agency AI reporting requirements were just released not too long ago. But a use case, like you're sitting in front of an agency who knows ChatGPT's out there, but thinking bigger picture about a strategic plan, where do they start? They're just getting people assigned to the AI officer role.
Right. That's a great point. And when people talk about the directives, they don't realize that sometimes that, assign this officer is the sort of thing that's in the directive, not this framework versus that framework necessarily, because you have to think strategically in the beginning so you can then feel comfortable thinking tactically later about nuts and bolts. When we meet with agencies, we know that generative AI, for example, is not the answer to every problem. So we don't approach agencies with, excuse me, or internally the teams that we're working on projects for. We don't approach them saying, here's generative AI, what do you want to do with it? We say, typically for a software development team, we would ask, what is a task you wish that you could just give to someone else?
Or automate.
And so, because we treat the underlying models like very well prepared, highly motivated interns, for example. So it's a scalable army of assistants. So I don't like writing this particular template file all the time. Is a very common use case. Okay, what's the type of template file? The models already understand that. Great, just ask it to write that template file. Give it the requirements and it will do it. So software developers are very quick to adopt things like, oh, this can write test cases for you. I want to convert one language to another language. I need to update a framework to a different framework. Those are kind of things that are very, very commonly, they're stated in language. The output is a language. And so they're very, very easy. They're low-hanging fruit, and automation, things like that, are low-hanging fruit for the AI tools. We also, not every team is a software development team looking to generate code. We work with teams like Marcom, or like writing press releases, or working to write RFIs, responses to RFPs and things like that. The only requirement is that you be able to express your problem in terms of language. And so it requires teams or stakeholders from the agencies to think in terms of breaking down the problems, to be a little bit more granular, instead of saying, write me a novel, which is, writing things is, of course, the most common use case. Okay, just write me an outline. Okay, I don't like that outline. Let's refine it. Okay, now I have an outline I like.
You're having like a dialogue, and you're
absolutely
distilling it down.
Yes, yeah. You have a dialogue, and you say, wait, I have an old dialogue. I'm going to attach that to this model. Now the model knows the new dialogue as well, and you begin to build on it. It's a conversation. It's requirements gathering, but with the model and the team, not just the team. We talk about the AI is there to amplify human expertise, and it is not going to replace it. I use these tools all day, every day, and if you don't, you just learn to think in terms of the way to get the best possible response from the model. One thing we see from the agencies and internally that is an obstacle we have to overcome very regularly is someone will make a request, it will respond in a way that they don't like, and so they want to reject the entire technology. Not that they don't like AI, but this particular tool just isn't working, and it turns out you just have to learn to think about, you didn't actually ask what you think you asked, and so there's a training element, not just about building AI tools, but being able to use whatever tool set you're doing. And that's a much more vanilla standard training question.
I think that's a segment I'd like to dive into, which is this skill gaps or workforce, or again, some folks just, it's confusing, or I don't want to adopt it. It's not a rip and replace. I mean, the human intuition, I've heard everything you've said is, you or talking to the interface, it's combined. I always like to think of these computers as, look, they don't need coffee breaks and they don't need to generally sleep, but teaching by asking questions, I have found using some of these tools has really been easier, and I'm helping it understand what I'm searching for. And I can only imagine folks in, precision agriculture, or folks looking at the next generation satellite, or again trying to find a cure for some disease. It's pretty exciting times. Folks, again, AI.gov has a number of use cases. The federal government's really moved out tremendously on not just the spirit of, but actually developing use cases that some of which I'm sure you've tried and developed here at CGI. All right, leadership, right? You assign an officer, you give them a title, and we talked about it's not just, sometimes it's, what am I supposed to do with this new role? I mean, agencies have assigned, but how does somebody start wrapping their head around, how do you become an AI officer? hire a company to come in and help me think through what are the first few questions, what are the skills gaps that we have. I mean, talk to me like I'm an agency, saying I need some help on my strategy.
Sure. One of the things that we do very commonly, we do it on my team for any kind of skills gap, is we say, is anyone at your agency already doing this? No. Who at your agency wants to do this? Who would you trust with a difficult task, who's technically savvy and can do these things? And then you can work with an outside group to help either address the technical debt or functional debt that person has, because you already trust them and they've already proven themselves and are willing to raise their hand and say, I'm ready to take on this AI leadership role. We do that very, very commonly. People on teams that are already well trusted technically, functionally, raise their hand and say, I want to be the AI rep. I want to help understand these use cases. And it's not that you're going to necessarily develop new models or that you're going to drive something on the business side. It may just be, we need someone who's going to help us as an enterprise or as an agency get our heads around this, someone who is going to volunteer to sort of spearhead that, and they can learn along the way too. The biggest transition we've seen, I mentioned earlier, was the technical adoption to functional adoption. Not everybody needs to build models. That's only one part of how these things are going to end up contributing to the agencies and then to the citizens. Functional adoption is extraordinarily important. And so we do working sessions. Since the beginning, we've been doing working sessions with teams where we just come in. Everyone has, in our case, it's CGI's AI Assist, and we just basically whiteboard using the tools and say, let's just do working sessions the same way you would for anything else, in requirements gathering and things like that. My goal is that the shininess and uniqueness of the AI frameworks begins to kind of move to the background, and updates with clients become sort of dull. On the implementation side, I want the updates to be things are under control, things are on schedule, we're green. We're not yellow, we're not red. Because every cloud meeting these days is not how amazing is the cloud. It's how's the storage layer doing? Well, okay, next. That's my goal for the AI tool sets. And so what the leaders have to be able to do is communicate everything from how are the individual teams working to a new directive has come down, and everything in between. They have to assess, for example, AI maturity at an agency the same way 10 years ago if you said we want to do a data modernization. You have to see where the agency is. What we look for, and when we work with agencies, we look for a particular use case or two use cases, maybe three, at that agency that showcase different things that are valuable to them. And then we can abstract out from those and say, okay, from the AI.gov list, this entire block of these use cases are exactly the one we built here, because behind the scenes, they all use identical infrastructure. The second use case is this other block from AI.gov, but tailored to specific agencies to add value for them.
Yeah, the library that is out for public domain, and again, the administration has really pushed from, initially the blueprint or the Bill of Rights on AI to now they're providing these updates. It's interesting, just going through those 83 that I was, taking a look at, it was from almost every agency, the CFO Act agencies, just so many doing unique things, needing AI for a specific purpose. And I think if you can touch on, there is no cookie cutter approach, correct? I mean, every agency has a unique mission. And when you go to meet with the agencies, I mean, they're under this, voluminous, pile of mandates and requirements to help them think through that journey. Is that something that, and maybe here's the question, is what could government be doing to better prepare, aside from just trying to meet with the mandates, say, when they sit with you? What should they be thinking about? You mentioned a process, an efficient process, some low-hanging fruit. What is some of that low-hanging fruit they could be thinking about?
Some of the low-hanging fruit they can think about is automating processes and making, for example, knowledge at an agency available to the experts at the agency in a much, much quicker and natural way, which would be like an intelligent assistant that is an expert on that agent's policies, on that agency's policies. Because if you build something like that, it's immediately available to the citizens as well. And the same, it's if we're an integrator, but it's the technical side's responsibility to recognize that the infrastructure is the same for all those things. And so once you have a tool set that has been, or one facet of a tool set even that's been adopted in an agency safely, that agency can then be confident that attaching an already established technology to that won't harm it in a security sense. And so you can expand into a constellation of use cases at an agency and over time generalize at an agency the same way you would for any of the technical maturity levels for any kind of technology. You have individual things that are happening at an agency. Then there are teams that get started. Then there's an entire silo that begins to adopt. And at the end, you have it fully integrated at an agency, right? And all of the metrics are being tracked and those kind of things. The same thing applies for AI. The thing that's a little bit different about AI is that people don't, not just people outside my team, like people in general, the people in capital P people, don't quite have a handle yet on what all of the security concerns are going to be and what the guardrails are or are not going to accomplish. And so the tools are evolving super quickly. And so every day we come to work, we have to review what's been released that day or the day before so that we can be sure we're not making a claim about a security posture or how to help an agency address a technical gap or a maturity level assessment at an agency, that what we're saying is still true. But the way our teams are structured is my team takes a new technology, beats it up, builds out use cases as proofs of concept, and then those move to not quite enterprise development teams, but POC development teams that can abstract out and elevate and solidify into an application or a solution. Then those can go to enterprise development teams. And so it's like the AI maturity level for an agency in a micro scale, because our individual teams do that with individual use cases.
So let me ask you a direct question, and thank you for that. I mean, the perspective, we talked about, this agency leadership and being assigned the chief AI officer. And I think of the many chiefs in government, IT officers, CIOs, chief data officers, chief human capital officers, right? You mentioned about process people who might be looking to create a much more efficient process. I did a little search on challenges facing businesses, organizations seeking to implement AI into organizational culture. And then feel free to comment on either of these or say
Sure.
spot on, in no particular order. Lack of AI-specific skills and talent, data quality and governance, and resistance to change and cultural shift. Would you agree? I do, but I'm like, wow, that's a lot that has to happen outside of appointing somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. The data quality,
Okay.
as somebody who's like my whole career has been in data, I was like, oh yeah, I mean, of course. Like the data quality, because if you say, for example, our knowledge assistants, we restrict what they can comment on. And so if I ask it how to cook something and it's an assistant for a specific agency, it will say, I don't even know what you're talking about. I can't allow it to just make things up. And if I give it access to agency data that happens to be incorrect, which we've seen many times, it will very, very earnestly give an answer, very heartfelt, very convincing, that happens to be wrong because the underlying data is wrong. Just like a data modernization effort, there has to be a concerted effort during the adoption to be sure that the data is if it's going to be ground truth, it has to be ground truth. And so you have to either be able to mitigate risks that come up because you missed something, or you need to be able to address transparently how you came up with an answer from that bad data. And the resistance to change, 200%.
Okay. So I love that you picked that one because I was kind of hoping you would, because we talked a bit about it is a cultural shift. It is important that we have those skill sets. And I think there's no AI 101 somebody can take. It's a continuous learning. And, before we close out, this can go on for hours and hours. Sure. I do have one question when you wearing your CGI hat. The integration component, right? We hear in being a former federal chief technology officer, it was new product come in and I used to have a disdain for the lift and shift and rip and replace. Sure. I mean, integration of a tool into an environment, how hard is that? What is an expectation that you can set for any agency or organization undergoing, an AI implementation? Is there a tip or two that you would say, hey, it's not a slow burn, but it's not going to happen overnight?
Yeah, I would say think about these things, and this is how I think about them. The AI tools, using generative AI as a good example of this, they don't just generate a bunch of text and you have to figure out how to install all these bits of software to do it. At the end of the day, that's an API call, and every agency has extremely talented and well-trained people that understand application infrastructure, understand how to access to cloud safely. They know about security postures. They have cyber teams, all those things. At the end of the day, this is a cloud technology. It can also be on-prem, but if we're talking about cloud, remember that it is can be as simple as a managed service and can be integrated like that. Or that's how I would suggest you get started with it. Set up sandboxes, safely test these things, and then gradually as your staff and your teams become more comfortable with them, then you can begin to do more outrageous or elaborate things with them. But just get your heads around, the same way with CloudFirst, get your heads around the cloud, get your heads around what these tools are capable of in very safe environments. And remember, at the end of the day, these are application infrastructure and data infrastructure questions.
So to close out, I want you to think about your parting shot, something from today that you think would be of relevance for the audience today, knowing that there'll be something new down the road, and that is this takes advantage, this AI approach, this framework, the tool, it's building on a lot of the infrastructure over the years from cloud to protecting our data. You mentioned the word security and protecting. We still have to do that, but AI is just another component along that journey. And sure as heck sounds like it takes a village, and that's a good thing to maybe unite horizontally across the federal government. So, parting shot. What struck you today, and what do you want to underscore after this conversation?
I want to underscore that the AI tools, again, they are designed to amplify human expertise, not replace it. Without the people, the tools are interesting, and they're not much more than that. I would suggest anybody that wants to learn more about how these tools work, go to something like GPT or any publicly available one, ask it harmless questions about something you are actually interested in, and learn how to ask those questions. I say harmless because if you're concerned about public versus private, but go to an available tool set like GPT and just start interacting with it. It will immediately increase your comfort level about what these things can and can't do, and will start to help you think about, another problem that this would help with, which is the point of it all, not to generate limericks, which they're very good at, but to solve problems in novel ways.
And I'll add on to that, give Josh Sonnier a call, because he sure knows what he's talking about. Josh, it was great. I enjoyed the conversation. Clearly, you're an expert in this field, and kudos to CGI for pioneering a lot of this effort. And we look forward to catching up again soon.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
You can find CGI Voices on your preferred podcast platform or watch the video version on YouTube. Subscribe or follow, and spread the word to your colleagues. CGI Voices. Expert insights for federal decision makers.